The United States Supreme Court recently heard oral arguments in Case versus Montana, a significant Fourth Amendment challenge concerning when police officers may enter a private residence without a warrant. This case builds upon previous unanimous Supreme Court rulings that protect citizens from warrantless home entries and could have major implications for homeowners across the country, particularly those who own firearms. The outcome of this case will directly affect how law enforcement approaches emergency situations and the extent to which constitutional protections shield private homes from government intrusion. The facts surrounding this case began when Trevor Case's ex-girlfriend contacted police, expressing concern after a phone conversation with him. She reported having a bad feeling about the call and mentioned he might have a gun. She also expressed worry that Case might shoot at officers if they entered his home. When police arrived with the ex-girlfriend at Case's residence, she could not recall the specific content of their conversation, but maintained her sense of concern about the situation. This vague recollection would later become a central issue in evaluating whether officers had sufficient justification to enter the home without a warrant. Four officers responded to the scene. All officers were familiar with Case and aware of his mental health history, having had previous interactions with him. Upon arrival, officers searched through windows of the home but failed to locate Case inside. They observed an empty holstered handgun and a notepad visible through one of the windows. Officers knocked on doors and called out without response. They also shined flashlights through windows attempting to get Case's attention or locate him within the residence. Despite these efforts over an extended period, Case did not appear or respond to their presence. Officers debated among themselves whether to enter the home. Some expressed safety concerns based on prior interactions with Case, citing their knowledge of his behavior and mental health issues. However, others believed he posed no real threat. One officer remarked that Case did not have the guts to harm them, suggesting a dismissive attitude toward the perceived danger. After approximately 40 minutes at the residence, officers made the decision to enter through an unlocked front door. This decision would become the focal point of the constitutional challenge, as it involved crossing the threshold of a private home without judicial authorization. Two officers proceeded upstairs to search the second floor of the residence. In an upstairs bedroom, one officer observed a closet curtain move, revealing Case's face and what appeared to be a black object in the darkened space. Perceiving an immediate threat, the officer discharged his weapon, striking Case in the arm. The bullet passed through to his stomach, causing serious injury. Officers then handcuffed Case and searched the room. They recovered a handgun reportedly located near a laundry basket. The question of whether this firearm was actually in Case's possession at the moment of the shooting or merely nearby would become relevant to assessing the reasonableness of the officer's response. Case was charged with multiple violations following the incident. He argued that the warrantless entry violated his Fourth Amendment rights under the 14th Amendment, and therefore all evidence, including the recovered firearm, should be suppressed from use in court. This argument invoked the exclusionary rule, which prevents illegally obtained evidence from being used in criminal prosecutions. Lower courts rejected these arguments, finding that the officer's entry was justified under existing exceptions to the warrant requirement. The Montana Supreme Court upheld the entry in a 4-3 split decision, applying a reasonable suspicion standard rather than the more stringent probable cause standard. This close split revealed disagreement even among state Supreme Court justices about the proper legal framework for evaluating such entries. Case petitioned the United States Supreme Court for review, which was granted. The Supreme Court's decision to hear the case signaled its recognition that important questions about Fourth Amendment protections needed clarification. In his petition, Case argues that the Fourth Amendment's probable cause requirement should apply to emergency aid situations like his. He asked the court to vacate the Montana ruling, which used the lesser reasonable suspicion standard. Case also argued that the search was not justified under the community caretaking doctrine, which the Supreme Court had previously rejected in Coniglia v. Strum. That earlier case involved police entering a home to seize firearms for safekeeping, and the court unanimously ruled that the community caretaking exception, which applies to vehicles, does not extend to homes. Both the Trump administration and the state of Montana argued for probable cause to be rejected by the Supreme Court in this context. They contended that it should not apply to emergency aid cases, where officers must make split-second decisions based on rapidly evolving circumstances. The Trump administration proposed a sliding scale approach using reasonable suspicion in these types of situations, arguing that a more flexible standard better accommodates the realities of emergency response. Montana argued that the warrantless entry was justified under existing emergency exception precedents and that requiring probable cause would hamper law enforcement's ability to protect people in genuine emergencies. During oral arguments, the justices focused heavily on whether the Montana Supreme Court properly applied established Supreme Court precedents, specifically Brigham City v. Stewart and Coniglia v. Strum. Brigham City established that officers may enter a home without a warrant when they have an objectively reasonable basis to believe someone inside needs immediate aid. Justice Barrett characterized the Montana Supreme Court's ruling as sloppy, indicating strong criticism of the lower court's legal analysis. This unusually direct language from Justice Barrett suggested deep concern about how the Montana court had handled the case. The consensus among justices appeared to be that Montana failed to correctly apply the proper legal standard established in prior Supreme Court decisions. The central question became not whether Montana was wrong, but what remedy the Supreme Court should provide. Many justices asked whether they should simply vacate and remand the case to Montana and instruct them to apply the Brigham City standard correctly. Other justices questioned whether they should decide the case themselves, apply the standard, and give guidance to lower courts to settle the issue comprehensively. This debate reflected different judicial philosophies about the Supreme Court's role in correcting lower court errors. During the arguments, cases counsel primarily pushed for the Supreme Court to apply the Fourth Amendment probable cause jurisprudence to emergency aid cases. However, none of the Supreme Court justices appeared in favor of doing that. The justices seemed reluctant to impose a rigid probable cause requirement on emergency situations where officers must act quickly. Instead, it seems likely they will at best remand this case back down to the Montana Supreme Court with instructions to apply the Brigham City case properly. This case affects fundamental Fourth Amendment protections for all citizens. The Supreme Court has an opportunity to clarify or expand upon previous unanimous decisions regarding warrantless home entries. The ruling will establish clear boundaries for when law enforcement may enter private residences under emergency aid exceptions. This directly impacts homeowners' rights, including gun owners concerned about potential firearm confiscation during warrantless entries by police officers. The intersection of emergency aid exceptions and firearms in the home makes this case particularly important for Second Amendment advocates. Legal observers anticipate another potentially unanimous decision, similar to the court's 9-0 rulings in related warrantless entry cases. The decision will have broad implications for Fourth Amendment jurisprudence and the delicate balance between public safety and constitutional protections against unreasonable searches and seizures. Courts across the country will look to this decision for guidance on how to evaluate emergency entries. The case awaits a final ruling from the Supreme Court. Given the apparent consensus during oral arguments that Montana misapplied existing precedent, a reversal of the Montana Supreme Court decision appears likely. The remaining question is whether the Supreme Court will simply correct Montana's error or use this opportunity to provide comprehensive guidance on emergency aid doctrine for all courts nationwide. Either outcome will represent a significant development in Fourth Amendment law and will impact how police officers across the country approach similar situations in the future.